But it's a very interesting journey of how this can't be just a decision that you make. It has to involve every aspect of the home.
Yeah.
And take into consideration what are their fears.
Yes.
And what are their assumptions. And can you control any of that? Can you make changes to that?
Right.
And thereby, here's how we go. Do you think men go through these kind of things, or is it just women who go through?
Well, I guess most women, my experience of what men do is very closely knitted to men in my family and men who are very good friends. And I do not see a conversation like this happening. In fact, I think the other conversation I had to have very clearly with my husband was to say that I need a certain level of stability. And I told him, I said, for me to give up all of this and go, I unfortunately still need my creature comforts. Those are things that, I said, I'm 40 and I'm not willing to give up on that. That also included what he could do in his career. And we sort of said that, okay, the first couple of years we're not going to count because I'm just going to get my arms around things. But once business picks off, I said, for 5 years, you need to give me a no rocky platform. I don't believe that's a conversation, or that's perhaps a thought process that men instinctively have. But I'm finding that perhaps more men are willing to be a part of that conversation if one of us were to initiate it. I'm finding that it's maybe something that they're glad is happening because it's out there in the open. There isn't anything that's, an expectation sort of thing. You should have understood that this would happen, sort of pressure's not there. So I find that at least with the men I very closely interact with within family and close friends, I'm finding that they're very open to those conversations.
So I have a very curious question here, Devi. For someone who's listening to this conversation, who's probably not had these kind of conversations as a man in the house with the family, where do they start? Do they start by opening this as a conversation, or how do you go about it?
I think it takes a couple of steps back, Soujanya. This is something we spoke about in a men's, being a better dad. I didn't like the word better dad. Being a dad for today is something that we ran a session on with one of our corporate clients. And one of the things I said is, how many of us actually sit back, because the mums do it, all of us do it as mums, to sit back and say, 20 years from now, how do I see my child? How do I want my relationship with my child to be? It's a very conscious conversation that at least I know my friends and I have, because we know that, by the time we're in our 60s or whatever, right, we're not going to have a job keeping us going all the time. And the relationship with our child is going to be so fundamental. Perhaps the structure's shifted, right? It's two equal peers who are talking now. To say that, so therefore, what do I want that relationship to look like? Bring it down to very simple, tangible things. Saying, would I like a call a day? Would I like a call every 3 days? Would I like a trip with my child once a year or twice a year? Would I like that? If I do, then I think it's time we started doing it now. You've got to sow the seeds now in small ways and start practicing a lot of that yourself as a parent, because you've got to start building that up very slowly. I would say for men, it's a great idea to have that conversation saying, what do I want of our relationship? Apart from, of course, the basics, right? That we're going to be together, we're going to be, in a comfortable place financially, we're going to be in a lovely house, the kids are settled, and then what? What does, two individual people, entities interacting with each other look like? If it is going to be one of not too much bitterness, of saying that I gave up so much for you and I got nothing out of it, because that is going to happen. Yeah. I mean, as much as we don't want it to happen, that conversation is going to come up at some point of time, if it hasn't already. Then it's a great idea to say, how do I kind of, do a lot of self-reflection and say, how do I kind of balance that out? Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'd like to bring up here is, we speak a lot about mental health and, depression and all of that. I think the biggest true pandemic is loneliness. I think, fundamentally, with the way that social media has picked up and our interactions with each other increasing, we are becoming more and more and more lonely people. You know, our way of thinking, our way of interactions is becoming more inward looking. And therefore, I think it's a great question for perhaps a man to ask as well. You know, I think when it comes to masculinity, we've kind of always added the word toxic to it. But if you look at some of our biggest sources of strength, it's actually men. You know, my dad, my uncles to a certain extent, my husband, these are the people who, you know, are always around, who are there to do the stuff that you cannot do. They're always around. And somehow that strength, because of whatever reasons, it's just gone through this whole transformation of saying no. So oftentimes I actually speak to a bunch of mothers, and this is something that's on my mind all the time, saying, you know, telling all our girls to be stronger and go for it. You can be anything that you want. And we're telling our boys, saying, be careful, you know, you've got to be careful about the statements you make.